They called him intense. Too intense. The words hung in the sterile air of the waiting room, echoing the judgment that had already been passed in reports, in hushed phone calls, in the weary, wary glances of the social workers assigned to his case. Michael sat on the hard plastic chair, his hands clasped tightly, trying to look anything but intense, knowing the effort itself probably read as strained, maybe even deceptive. He just wanted his daughter back. That was the only intensity that mattered. Years he had parented alone, scraped by, worked double shifts, learned to braid hair from a shaky online tutorial. He had been the steady constant, the anchor in a world that had been anything but stable for his daughter after her mother left. He had been everything. And now, because some strangers saw his frustration, his fierce protectiveness, his sheer exhaustion as something negative, something threatening, he was on the verge of losing the one person who made his life make sense. The custody hearing felt less like a search for truth and more like a performance where he had already been cast as the villain. The social worker's report, read aloud with detached clinical precision, painted a picture of a volatile man, quick to anger, potentially unstable. They highlighted isolated incidents, ripped from context, magnified minor disagreements into signs of deep-seated issues. They saw the calloused hands of a construction worker, the lines etched by worry around his eyes, the quiet, simmering frustration of someone constantly battling a system that seemed determined to misunderstand him, and they labeled it dangerous. They didn't see the gentle hand guiding a bicycle, the patient voice reading bedtime stories, the steady presence at every school play and scraped knee. They didn't see the love. His attorney, a tired-looking woman named Sarah who seemed genuinely sympathetic but also overwhelmed by the uphill battle, had warned him. "They have a narrative," she'd said, her voice low. "They're looking for a certain type. You don't fit it on paper. We need to show them the reality." But how do you show 20 years of quiet devotion against a backdrop of clinical reports and legal definitions? How do you prove patience when every word you utter is scrutinized for a hint of that intensity they were so determined to find? He watched the judge, a woman with sharp eyes and an impassive face, listening to the social worker drone on, her words building a cage of suspicion around him. The opposing attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, occasionally interjected with leading questions, each one a small jab designed to reinforce the negative image. Michael felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, the helpless frustration, the injustice of it all. He forced it down. "Breathe, Michael, breathe." For Maya, what happened next was not part of their plan. Not Sarah's plan, not the social worker's plan, certainly not the opposing attorney's plan. It was Maya's plan. They called her name, Maya. She walked to the witness stand, a slip of a girl in a simple blue dress, her hands clasped in front of her. Michael's heart ached looking at her, so small in the large, intimidating room, yet holding herself with a quiet dignity that belied her years. She sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked straight ahead, not meeting anyone's eyes. The opposing attorney approached, his voice softening slightly, adopting a tone he probably thought was comforting, paternal. It grated on Michael. This man knew nothing about being a father. "Hello, Maya." The attorney began, a practiced smile on his face. "Thank you for being here. I know this is difficult." Maya nodded, silent. "We've heard some things today," the attorney continued, glancing towards the social workers, then back at Maya. "Things about your father, about his temper, about whether he's a safe person." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Do you ever feel afraid when your father is angry?" It was a trap. Michael knew it. Sarah had drilled him on how these questions would come, designed to elicit a frightened child's perspective, twisting normal moments of parental frustration into something sinister. He held his breath, his knuckles white where his hands were still clasped. Maya looked at the attorney. Her gaze was steady. "My dad gets frustrated sometimes," she said, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the tense silence. It wasn't loud, but it carried. "Like when I leave my socks on the floor, or when the printer doesn't work." A ripple went through the small crowd in the gallery. The attorney's smile faltered, just for a second. He hadn't expected this direct, almost mundane answer. Yes, well, he cleared his throat. Frustration is one thing, but the reports suggest anger, intimidation. Do you ever feel intimidated by him? Maya tilted her head slightly. She reached down beside her chair, where she had placed a worn fabric bag. Michael watched, confused. What was she doing? She pulled out a stack of what looked like folded paper. A thick stack. She placed them on the stand in front of her, arranging them neatly. The rustle of paper seemed loud in the quiet courtroom. The attorney looked perplexed. What is that, Maya? He asked, his voice losing its practiced smoothness. These, Maya said, her small hand resting on the stack, are the Father's Day cards I made for my dad. She looked up, meeting the attorney's eyes now. And then, she did the last thing anyone expected. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She picked up the top card. It was colorful, a child's drawing clearly visible. This one, she said, her voice soft now, is from when I was 6. She unfolded it carefully. It says, Happy Father's Day, Daddy. You are the best dad. You make me laugh. I love you more than pizza. She paused, a faint smile touching her lips. He is good at making me laugh, she added, a small, unsolicited detail. She picked up the next card. This one is from when I was 7. She unfolded it. To the strongest, bravest dad. Thank you for killing the spider. And for teaching me to ride my bike. I love you. She continued, one by one. Each card a year. A memory. A simple, heartfelt testament to the man who was her father. The courtroom was utterly silent, save for Maya's quiet voice and the gentle rustle of paper. Age 8, she read. Dad, thank you for helping me with my homework even when you were tired. Thank you for making pancakes. You are my superhero. Age 9. For Dad, you always listen when I'm sad. You tell the best jokes. I wish everyone had a dad like mine. The opposing attorney stood rooted to the spot, his earlier confidence evaporating. He glanced at the judge, at the social workers, then back at the girl who was simply reading her own history, her own truth into the record. His face seemed to shrink, his shoulders slumped slightly. He was being dismantled, not by legal argument, but by construction paper and crayon. Michael sat straighter, tears blurring his vision. These were treasures, relics of their life together. He had kept every single one. He remembered the sticky tape, the misspelled words, the fierce pride in her eyes when she presented them. He hadn't realized she remembered them with such clarity, had kept them in her heart. Maya didn't dramatize. She didn't plead. She just presented the evidence of their shared life, year by year, word by word, in her own calm, steady voice. Age 10. Dear Dad, I know sometimes things are hard, but you never give up. You teach me to be strong. I love our movie nights. The social workers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The narrative they had built was crumbling with every simple, loving phrase read by the child they were supposedly protecting from this man. Age 11. For the best dad in the world. You make the best rice. And you listen. Really listen. Thank you for being you. Michael remembered that year. It had been particularly tough, financially and emotionally. He hadn't thought she'd noticed his struggle, but she had seen the resilience he hoped to teach her. Age 12. Dad, thank you for always being there. Even when I'm grumpy, you understand. You are my best friend. She reached the last card, the one from the most recent Father's Day. She unfolded it slowly. Her voice, which had remained remarkably even, seemed to gain a touch of something deeper now. A quiet intensity that mirrored her father's, but born of love, not frustration. This is from this year, she said. It says, to Dad, they don't see what I see. They see the outside. But I see your heart. I see how hard you try. I see how much you love me. Thank you for being my dad. I love you. She finished reading and carefully folded the card, placing it back on the stack. She didn't look at her father. She didn't look at the social workers. She looked at the opposing attorney, whose face was now pale, his eyes fixed on the stack of cards as if they were accusing documents. He stood there for a long moment, the carefully constructed questions forgotten, the aggressive posture gone. He had no response to a decade and a half of a child's pure, unfiltered love. No legal maneuver could counter that. He visibly swallowed, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, turned his head away, looking towards the wall, anywhere but at Maya and the cards. The judge, who had watched this entire exchange with rapt attention, leaned forward slightly. "Do you have any further questions for this witness, counsel?" she asked the opposing attorney, her voice neutral, but carrying a weight of its own. He shook his head, still not looking at anyone. "No, Your Honor," he mumbled. "No further questions." Sarah, Michael's attorney, rose. She had tears in her eyes. She didn't ask Maya about the reports, about the social worker's concerns. She didn't need to. "Maya," Sarah said gently, "do you want to live with your father?" Maya looked at her, then finally her eyes flickered towards Michael. A small, brave smile touched her lips. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "More than anything." Sarah nodded, her own smile watery. "Thank you, Maya. That's all." Maya carefully gathered her stack of cards, held them tight, and stepped down from the stand. As she walked back towards the seating area, she passed her father's table. She paused for just a second, her eyes meeting his. In that look, Michael saw everything: the years, the struggles, the bond that had endured it all, the unshakable foundation of their love. He gave her a tiny nod, a silent promise. The remaining proceedings felt like a formality. The judge listened to closing arguments, but the air had shifted. The clinical language of the social workers now sounded hollow, theoretical, placed against the undeniable, tangible evidence of a child's lived experience. The opposing attorney barely spoke, defeated by paper and truth. The judge didn't take long to make her decision. When she spoke, her voice was firm. She acknowledged the social worker's concerns, the difficulties in the case, but she also spoke about the importance of a child's testimony, of the evidence presented, of the clear and abiding bond between parent and child demonstrated in court. She ruled in Michael's favor. Full custody. The court found him to be a fit and loving parent. His intensity recontextualized not as anger, but as fierce parental love and protective vigilance. A wave of relief, so profound it felt physical, washed over Michael. He closed his eyes for a brief second, a shaky breath escaping his lips. He hadn't realized how tightly coiled he had been, how deep the fear had gone. As the judge concluded the hearing, she did something highly unusual. She looked directly at Michael, who was still processing the verdict, still feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. "Mr. O'Connell," she said, using his name with respect now, "you have raised a remarkable young woman." Michael could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Then, as he stood to leave, gathering his worn briefcase, preparing to walk out of the courtroom and back into his life, this time with his daughter firmly by his side, something extraordinary happened. First, a few people in the gallery stood, then others. A quiet ripple of movement turned into a wave. The bailiffs, the clerks, even the stern-faced social workers who had judged him so harshly, they stood up. And then, the judge herself rose from her bench. The opposing attorney remained seated for a moment, staring at the table, before slowly, reluctantly, getting to his feet. The entire courtroom, standing in silent acknowledgement. Not applause, not cheering, but a standing ovation of quiet respect. For the father who had been misjudged, for the daughter who had spoken her truth, for the simple power of love revealed. Michael walked out of that courtroom, his daughter's hand in his, the stack of Father's Day cards clutched safely in her other arm, into the bright sunlight. The air outside felt different, lighter. He looked down at Maya, her face radiant, a genuine smile finally breaking through the tension of the day. She hadn't just won him his case. She had rewritten his story. What happened next was the slow process of rebuilding, of pushing back against the labels. The social workers, faced with the undeniable reality of the courtroom, adjusted their approach, though true understanding seemed slow in coming for some. The opposing attorney, humbled by the experience, reportedly became less aggressive in future child custody cases, perhaps reminded that lives, not just legal victories, were at stake. Michael's life didn't magically become easy. He still worked hard. There were still challenges. But the fundamental injustice, the threat of losing his daughter based on a flawed perception, was gone. He had been seen. They had been seen, as a family, flawed and real and bound by a love that had proved stronger than judgment. He never forgot the moment the courtroom stood. It wasn't just about him winning custody. It was a moment where a system, designed to be impartial but sometimes swayed by incomplete information and inherent biases, paused to recognize a fundamental human truth. It was a silent apology from those who had misjudged, a recognition from those who had witnessed. His daughter thrived. The quiet resilience she had shown on the stand was not a performance. It was a core part of who she was, nurtured by the very father who had been deemed too intense. She grew into a confident young woman, forever grounded by the stack of cards that sat on her desk, a physical reminder of her own power and the enduring strength of her family. Reflecting on that day, Michael often thought about how easily he could have let the anger consume him, how the frustration could have boiled over, proving the social workers right. But he hadn't. He had held onto his dignity, guided by his love for Maya, and Maya, in turn, had found her own quiet, powerful way to speak that love into existence, transforming a sterile courtroom into a space where truth, in its simplest form, could stand and be recognized. This story is a reminder that judgment is easy, especially when we only see part of the picture, when we rely on assumptions and stereotypes. That sometimes, the most profound truths are not spoken in loud arguments or official reports, but in the quiet, steady voice of a child reading from a faded Father's Day card. It shows us that resilience isn't always loud defiance, but often a quiet, persistent holding on to love and truth in the face of misunderstanding. That hidden potential isn't just about undiscovered skills, but about the unseen depths of character, the unwavering strength of a parent's love, the simple courage of a daughter. What happened next was justice. Not the cold, abstract justice of legal precedent, but a warmer human justice, where the truth of a relationship outweighed the weight of a flawed report, where a father's worth was finally seen, and where a child's love literally brought a room full of strangers to their feet. Never underestimate the power of a simple truth, spoken from the heart. Never assume you know someone based on a file or a first impression. Look closer, listen harder, because sometimes the most powerful stories, the most profound testaments to who we are written not in ink on official paper, but in crayon on folded cardstock, saved year after year after year. Look for the hidden potential. Listen for the quiet strength. Champion the underestimated, because the truth, when it finally emerges, can be powerful enough to make the whole room stand.